According to the front page of the November 3rd, 1985 edition of the Blue Ridge Beacon, the devil came to Blairsville Baptist. That shocking headline alone, strengthened by the infamous satanic panic that was sweeping the then conservative Reagan era, catapulted what was ultimately an isolated incident into the plethora of anecdotal evidence that America and its Judeo-Christian foundations were being eroded and invaded by ritualistic devil worshippers. For some, the Blairsville Judgment House incident, as it was called, was but a drop in the bucket compared to the reported 12,000 cases of the occult during its time. Others, however, persist that the sleepy town has never felt the same sense. Some in this camp have even gone on to move away from the area, citing the incident as their prime motivation. And Pastor Douglas Michaels, head of the Blairsville Baptist Church both then and now, is not one of those people. "I mean, it was absolutely sickening," he says, from safely behind his Maplewood desk in his little office behind the fellowship hall. "But we here in Blairsville are a resilient bunch. The Lord's been faithful to us, even despite the stumbling blocks we faced." Pastor Douglas nods with a faint smile. Despite being born and raised, in his words, in the great state of the Georgia Peach, his accent is about as Kentucky fried as a 12-piece bucket of chicken. "What about the ones who've left?" "Who's that? You mean the Dustin Girls folks?" "Among others." He nods long and hard, then licks his chops. "They were good folks. Christian folks. But I don't blame 'em for leaving this place." He taps his desk with his fingers like he was picking up an apple. "The memories, I reckon." "Do they ever haunt you too?" "Of course. You think it doesn't pop into my head when I'm here alone at night? I mean, H-E double hockey sticks. We fumigated the halls days after. But I suppose it's more than just the germies that could have lingered there. If I can help it, I steer clear. Nowadays, that room's mostly for our Sunday potlucks or the AA meetings anyway. But back then, it was used for the Judgment House." "Right," Michael drawls. He smiles across his desk with closed lips until the steaming mug in his hand reaches them. It reads, "World's Best Pastor," and from it, he takes a loud chug. What is a judgment house anyway? The supposed world's best pastor places the mug atop his Maplewood desk with a dull thud. "Well, technically, we weren't the first church to do the whole judgment house thing anyway. I believe it started in Florida. And come to think of it, in a nutshell, it's kind of like one of those spook houses folks put on in their garages. Only this one's more of an evangelism tool. I never got the appeal, but the kids loved it. At least the few years we put it on, they did." "And that includes Stephanie Dustin?" "Oh, yeah. Stephanie was one of our youth group's best leaders, in fact. Had a real connection with the kids, you know." The pastor's smile arose from his face to reveal a sadly solemn expression. "Darn shame what happened. I suspect if it weren't for Stephanie, we would have never put on that judgment house in the first place." "And what about Chet Lancaster?" Pastor Douglas's demeanor changes on a dime. He crosses his arms above his gut. "What about him?" "Have you seen him since the incident?" He nods. "I've seen him twice. The first time was right after it all happened. He was in county juvenile detention, or whatever you call it. And I had gone in on behalf of the church to visit. You know, to pray with him and such. The congregation didn't like that, though, especially not the Dustin's girls' folks. Why not? He lets out another sigh. This time, his entire pudgy body trembles. Some of the folks back then thought he might have been, possessed? Right. Do you think he was? Pastor Douglas sighs once more. Our church's official position is that spiritual warfare can and will happen. To what extent? Well, that's the question, ain't it? Some folks watch too many movies, I think. They see a kid lipping off to their folks and think their head's gonna spin. What did you think? Well, if you want to hear about demons crawling under your skin, I suggest you go on down to St. Matthew's up the block. Might be a bit more sensational for your story. I'm not saying there ain't demons out there. Lord knows there's a whole spiritual plane we can't even see. But I think they work differently. They don't so much as possess as influence. So, do you think Chet Lancaster was influenced? Pastor Douglas thinks about his next words carefully, and then slowly begins to nod his head. After that first visit to the jailhouse, I think so. He didn't want to be prayed for or nothing. Just wanted me to leave him alone. And in his eyes, he shivers despite the office's warmth. There was just nothing in him. Just nothing. What about the second time you saw him? That second time, he wouldn't pray with me again. Wouldn't even talk to me. So, I prayed by myself. What did you pray for? A look of guilt washes over the pastor's face. I prayed they wouldn't let him out. Unfortunately for Pastor Douglas Michaels, the Lord did not answer his prayer. Chet Lancaster was released from the Union County Juvenile Detention Center only 3 months after that second meeting on account of good behavior, reducing his 7-month sentence by nearly a half. Meanwhile, George E. Harris, a former congregant of Blairsville Baptist and, by extension, Pastor Douglas Michaels, would serve the entirety of his 4-year prison sentence under a conviction of negligent homicide. I mean, yeah, technically, Lancaster had nothing to do with it. On paper. You seem to be implying something. George nods, his once long hair documented eternally in both his mugshot photograph and the ones taken of the church volunteers prior to the October of 1985 no longer flaps as his head bobs. Instead, a military-styled buzz cut resumes its place. If you poke a sleeping bear and it wakes up and starts mauling people, did the bear really kill him? Or did you? The bear. George bonks like a chicken. Whatever. I know what I did. And I know what he did. Which is... George sighs and rubs his hand through his thinning hair. He set me up. And how exactly did he do that? George glares up at me with furrowed brows and an incredulous grin. You on his side or something? Just playing devil's advocate, so to speak. Figures. Medius has had their bias since the get-go. What do you mean? George looks at me sardonically. I mean, then failing to report all the weird shit he did right before it happened. Such as? George puffs out a breath. It reeks of cheap beer. Him going out in the woods at night, parking his car outside her house? We were practically going steady at that point, until I thought she might have been cheating on me with Sweaty Chetty. Why'd you call him that? Lancaster. Have you seen the guy? He's been sweating since he was born. Guess that's how he got out of the womb, slippery son of a bitch. Yet you were in a love triangle with him and Stephanie? George lets out a cackle and slaps the kitchen table with his palm. Love triangle. The only love triangle Lancaster was ever a part of was between him, his mama, and God. And I bet God dropped out long before the incident. He'd be lucky if he was in a love line. So why suspect your then steady girlfriend was cheating if he wasn't a threat? 'Cause that's what women do, man, George says. His smile disappears at this point. It's their favorite game to play. What is? George sighs and wipes his face. For calling Chet Lancaster sweaty, he sure is drenched in a perspiration of his own. Steph and I were going through a bit of a rough patch. I thought you were going steady, I interject. We were, he corrects me, until Bobby Owens' homecoming party. Then ever since we were on the rocks, and not in the fun way. What happened at the party? He sighs and rubs his hand through his non-existent hair. Typical relationship bullshit. There's a smile spread on his face for a brief second, before it disappears just as quickly as it came. I'd been talking to one of the girls in our class, all right? Hell, I don't even remember her name. That's how forgettable she was. What I do remember was that she was our teacher's pet. Got straight A's and everything. The whole 9 yards. That's why I was talking to her that night. We weren't flirting. I was trying not to fail geography. I don't do math. Geometry? Whatever, man. Steph swore up and down I was cheating on her, and all the convincing in the world wouldn't change her mind. That's who Steph was, you see. Headstrong, just like her mother. His eyes dart up and to the left and then settle back onto me. I even showed her the grade I got on that test about the triangles. A C+. C+. I ain't never got a C+ on a math test. Did she buy it? George's face droops at the sound of my question. Did she believe me? He rephrases. When Sweaty Chetty started coming around after the party, I knew her answer. She didn't. George shakes his head affirmatively. I think she was trying to make me jealous. And did she? Again, George swings his head. It's the game, man. That's why Lancaster was invited to be a part of the Judgment House that year. That's why I got so pissed off. And that's when you slashed her tires. The man before me catches his breath in midair. Somewhere behind him, a wall clock ticks impatiently. He nods feverishly. But I didn't think she'd fucking ride on him, for Christ's sake. But she did, I reply. He agrees with a silent series of nods. Much like Pastor Douglas Michaels, I hear him swallow audibly. Woman drivers, am I right? He grins painfully at me. I don't smile back. Donna Dustin, on the other hand, smiles brightly. In fact, her face seemingly beams the warm lamplight of her cozy living room. Through the blinds, there is a similarly shaded glow of orange-yellow as the sun sets on the sleepy neighborhood of Ducktown, Tennessee. Blairsville and its Baptist church of the same name resides some 30 miles southeast on the opposite side of the state line. Despite the busy bustle of the neighborhood just beyond the blinded window behind her, Donna Dustin's porch light isn't lit, and no candy awaits the dozens of trick-or-treaters scurrying about in the night. Halloween night. I make a gesture towards the window beyond it. You don't celebrate anymore? Donna's smile remains. Never did, sweetie. Then what about the Judgment House? Donna sighs and looks around the room for an answer. Instead of orange and black decorations and the occasional smiley face pumpkin, the walls are scattered with wooden crosses and family photographs, some of which feature her late daughter, Stephanie Dustin. These photos are much older than the rest. The Judgment House was Stephanie's idea, Donna explains. Her father and I never wanted her to go to those, as they call them, haunted houses. But we knew Stephanie's friends always went without her. Then we started attending Blairsville and heard about the whole Judgment House thing. My then husband supposed it was a fair compromise. She'd get to dress up and, well, do whatever they do on this night, but it'd be under the supervision of the church and Pastor Doug. You know, some people say this night is a Christian one. All Hallows Eve. Donna nods as if she had expected such a response. She probably had gotten it before. That's because the church tried its best to cover up its true origins, just like Christmas, even Easter. Halloween is a pagan night, make no mistake. You're talking about Samhain, I say, and Donna agrees. I'm surprised she's heard the word before. Like you, I too do my research, Donna says with a single nod. Even in the dim lighting, I notice now that her face is all dolled up and with bright red lipstick and rose-red blush. Perhaps she expected an interview captured on camera, or maybe she simply was as old-fashioned as her ideals. I'm about to ask a follow-up question when Donna cuts me off. All I'll say, sir, is that if tonight is a holy, she air quotes, of a night as I've come to believe, I have no doubts Mr. Lancaster will be in full celebration. Her statement is a perfect segue. So, you think Chet Lancaster is a devil worshipper? Donna squawks out an iconic chuckle. I know he is, she clarifies. You think any God-fearing person would have done what he did? Sure, Georgie Harris slashed the tires, but the boy was angry and seeing red. A hot temper shows great foolishness, you know. That's a proverb. Yes, it was a horrible accident, but I've forgiven him. What about Chet Lancaster? Donna thinks. Beneath her makeup, her face wrinkles. As best as I humanly can, I've forgiven him, yes. You have to keep in mind, sir, that display haunts me. I see it in my dreams, my nightmares. You're referring to the Judgment House? What Chet Lancaster did to it, yes. What he did with her. All under the guise of that awful mask. The devil mask? Donna nods apprehensively. She then takes a longing glance at the photograph of Stephanie on the wall. He really got into that role, Stephanie told me. When was this? A few weeks before the accident, when they were doing rehearsal. They rehearsed the Judgment House? Oh, sure. It required a lot of acting, apparently. Nothing we weren't used to in our household, though. Stephanie was a regular thespian, and quite good, too. At this point, Donna tears up some and her eyes fade to red. Shame she couldn't follow that dream, you know. Donna excuses herself and then clears her throat. She continues in a shakier tone. From what I saw, she was playing one of the sinners, the people that go to hell when they die, and she had gotten Chet to play the devil. I guess the boy was socially awkward and wanted to be a part of it. Apparently he was a thespian too. Real method actor, though. How so? Donna smiles a bit, and then it completely vanishes. Steffi told me that he had been a part of their Easter production that spring. I guess he had played one of the Jesuses. They had a couple for the different scenes, and had fasted for a week before the show. Starved himself, more or less, from what Stephanie said. Why's that? Donna shrugs. To get into character, I guess. A year before he did the same thing. For that production, I think it was the church's version of A Christmas Carol. He was nothing but an extra. A week before the show started, he broke his leg, but insisted to be in it. I squint at her questioningly. She continues. He had been cast as one of the poor people on the street. A crippled one with a crutch like Tiny Tim, you know? Her eyes widen at this point. Steffi said there was a rumor going around that he broke the leg himself just to walk with a hobble. And Tiny Tim didn't have a broken leg. He was ill. And so is Chet Lancaster, but not just sick in the head, she says, pressing a red-nailed fingertip into her temple. But ill in spirit. The man needs Jesus. So, do you think he's possessed? Donna takes in an exasperated breath. I don't see how he couldn't be. I mean, he desecrated the grave. The church stalked my daughter, used her body like that. And I know Georgie must have told you about how they saw him going out into the woods all by his lonesome. I know the kind of witchcraft they do out there in the Appalachians. So, yeah, he's possessed all right. Or at least he was. I nod. Pastor Michaels didn't think so. No? She asks, her brow furrowed. He said Chet Lancaster was influenced but not possessed. Donna's face expands from its narrowed, curious gaze. Now it becomes fuller and sadder. I could believe that, she says. Her tone indicates that, for her, the issue is resolved, and her follow-up question suggests as much. When was your interview with the pastor? 2 days ago. Donna nods agreeably. And what about Georgie? Yesterday. Oh, Lord Jesus, you must have just missed it. Miss what? The fire happened last night. I only know because I've kept in touch with the Harrises and got the call this morning. They didn't tell you. Tell me what? Donna sighs and braces herself. Georgie is dead, she says, holding back tears. They found his body all burnt up in his house. What was left of it anyway? What time was that at? When they found him? About 9:30 last night. Jesus. Yes, and may Jesus be with his soul. Amen. So, where do you think he is now? Donna is caught off guard by my question. Where is he? She asks for clarity. I nod. Well, I suppose his folks are arranging the funeral. If he's not in the casket by now, I bet they got him down to the city morgue. I watch her shudder at the thought of this, as though she were reliving an old haunted memory. Do you think he's in hell? Goodness, no. What kind of question is that? He's responsible for your daughter's death. My daughter's death was an accident. I know Georgie was upset with her. That much is obvious, but he'd never wanted to hurt her, much less. Her voice trails off. Kill her? Donna nods without looking at me. What wasn't an accident was what Chet Lancaster did. Which was? The beam from Donna's face is gone now. Don't you already know? Humor me. She takes in a long breath and her face reddens. He dug up my daughter and brought her body to the church. Our church. There, are you happy? What did he do with her? Donna's voice trembles. It wasn't her anymore. It was just her body, a husk. Well, what did he do with her body, then? You know darn well what he did. I want to hear it from you. Well, I don't want to talk about it, she says, shaking her head dispassionately. Tears begin to stream down her cheeks. I know he hung her up in the hell room, right? Covered her up in a plastic Halloween chain? Red strobe light? Yes, I know what he did. I'll never forget it as long as I live. Her body all mangled up as it was. The embalmers did what they could, but the accident left her all. And of course, I had to be the one to identify her. See her like that. Do you think she's still there? Donna looks up at me with tear-filled eyes that shake as she speaks. Still where? In hell. Donna gasps in disgust. Why on earth would you ask me that? What paper are you even with anyway? Who said I was with the paper? You said you wanted it. She starts to say, but then stops cold in her tracks. Let me ask you again, Mrs. Dustin. Do you think your daughter Stephanie is in hell right now? The next breath that escapes her comes from Donna's nose alone. I think you should leave, sir. I think I'll leave you the way I left Pastor Michaels. How's that? I shrug. They'll find out tomorrow morning. He's still in his office, I bet. Shame they'll have to fumigate the place again. A hot breath from Donna's nose fills the cold air between us. And Georgie? I'm guessing you killed him too? You'd call it killed. What would you call it? I thought about her question carefully, supposing it might be the last one she'd ever ask. Earlier, you brought up Samhain. You said you did your research. You remember that? Donna nods carefully. A look of realization is plastered across her face. Then you remember the bonfires, the sacrifices, witchcraft. I nod. I mean, Chet said George would burn fast and bright, and boy did he. So Chet sent you? I nod again. Well, why not do all this himself then, and why now? I guess you could say the stars have aligned, I tell her. They've aligned for us, for Chet. That's why he couldn't be here to see you face to face. He's busy preparing. For what? Tonight. I can hear Donna actively holding her breath. He wanted me to assure you that none of this was personal. All just part of the plan. Whose plan? Donna asks. I'm about to answer, but she answers herself. I know whose plan. Donna sighs, but before she can catch her breath, I stand from the couch across the living room, no longer cozy. All this over at Judgment House? I can't help but grin and remove the dagger Chet had given me from my coat pocket. This is the Judgment House.